from Y2K to cloud computing to now, AI. What's been the most dramatic shift in how enterprises approach their technology budgets?
Ooh, that's a good one. Rethinking information technology asset management. That was the nexus for me.
That's interesting stuff. That's the stuff where, I'm excited to have you on. Hey, welcome to Amplify AI Partners, where we explore how artificial intelligence is transforming the business operations and reshaping entire industries. I'm your host, Humza Malik, and today we're diving deep into a topic that touches every enterprise budget: IT asset management. So our conversation spans an incredible 25-year journey, going back to Y2K, which I believe at the time had IT departments scrambling a little bit. It was certainly present in pop culture, all the way to today's AI-driven transformation. That's really revolutionizing how we manage, optimize, and budget our technology assets. So today's guest, I think, brings a unique perspective to this evolution. Jeremy Boerger, known throughout the industry as the ITAM Coach. He started back in the Y2K days, right? And since then, he's witnessed and shaped every, major shift in how enterprises manage their technology investments. Jeremy is the founder of Boerger Consulting and the creator of the pragmatic ITAM method, which is a revolutionary approach that's helped major healthcare systems, global financial institutions, even manufacturing giants, right? Help them all slash their ITAM spending. And his best-selling book, Rethinking Information Technology Asset Management, has become essential reading for IT leaders who are maybe tired of hearing, this is just the way it is. Jeremy, welcome to Amplify AI Partners. Before we dive into our main topic, can you take a moment to introduce yourself and tell the listeners about your journey from those earlier days to becoming the ITAM coach?
Hamza, thanks again for having me on and getting to speak about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, me. The Y2K was really kind of the Wild West of the IT scene. You had the impact of the microprocessor from the 70s and 80s was really established itself in what it could do and what it couldn't do. You saw the sunsetting of a lot of mainframe and kind of the beginnings of remote computing as well, with battery technology and CPU technology, and actually, I should say, display technology catching up to the point that laptops were becoming more and more preferred in the business computing environment. So from my perspective, for me and mine, my background was actually philosophy and military history from the University of Dayton. And the reason why I mention that is because any philosopher will tell you that they studied philosophy because they're trying to justify the fact that they studied philosophy. But no, really, at that time, I had kind of a passing interest, a hobby interest in computers and IT. The internet was this neat new thing. The Y2K bug, for the folks that are too young to know about that, was really a bit of a identity crisis where the motherboard clocks in most all of the computers developed to that time only kept 2 digits for the year. Well, let's just say that, to be kind, we didn't expect them to work after the 2 digits turned over to 00. So it meant that just about every manufacturing, hospital, service management, you name it, had to take all of their IT computers, laptops, servers, what have you, rip them out and replace them with Y2K compatible motherboards that actually used 4 digits, because why the hell not? after we survived Y2K, because obviously we're still here, my boss at the time said, Jeremy, you're good at this. You've got a bit of a talent. I really don't want to lose you. How would you like to help me out with it was Office 98 renewal? That's how far back we're talking. And come to find out, I have a talent for reading very dense, very boring license agreements and putting together those kinds of charts to figure out what the spend is compared to the use, compared to other options that come along with the package. Remember, this was the time when Office had just a basic version, and then there was the pro version, and then I think there was another one that was a step above, but I won't bore you with the details. The point of it is that the next thing I know, 25 years later, here I am talking people to death about asset management. How is the best way to get your organization to take asset management seriously, to come at the unique problems and questions that asset management has, and then help save your organization about 30% on their software operating budget by having a effective program.
During a time back in the Y2K turn of the millennium time, every IT asset had to be meticulously cataloged and verified. And it's actually interesting you say your background's in philosophy and military history. I just finished a phase a couple months ago on reading a few books on Imam Ghazali, the Persian philosopher. And even as far as military history, I'm a fan of the Jocko podcast, and I even studied history myself back in school. How did that intense kind of probably deadline driven environment? How did that help to shape your philosophy about the ITAM fundamentals, at least?
Well, I tell you, it certainly helped shape my hairline. So yeah, no, it was pandemonium. It was panic, because you really didn't know what you were doing, and well, you didn't know what the impact was of not doing something. So you had a pretty compelling reason, but not necessarily a financial reason to replace all of this stuff with brand new stuff. And the reason why I check my wording on that, and I explain in my book, Rethinking Information Technology Asset Management, that was the nexus for me. While we were working there, we had to make some pretty quick decisions about where to spend our limited amount of time and resources that would end up having the biggest impact on the environment, on the project, and at the same time not paint ourselves into a corner that would cost us even more money if, say, we missed something and the entire manufacturing line shuts down for want of two more digits in the year. In my book, I realized that that fits in very perfectly with a decision matrix that Pascal came up with all the years ago. A very simple logic solution where you ask yourself two different questions, bivalent questions. They have to be yes or no. And it helps organize your tasks around what is going to be the most known, the most impactful versus the stuff you probably don't need to worry about because you either don't have enough information or it's just not, it has a low probability of happening. So that's what we were ended up doing. So it's like, okay, so what if something were to happen today, what machines were the most critical at this point in time, and get them repaired before or swapped out before they caused any sort of problem or aligned with a scheduled manufacturing shutdown or the like, versus some of the other stuff like, well, we've got a new hire, let them use one of the recovered machines for 3 to 4 weeks while we get the backlogged new machine that they could use, and then we know that we don't have to replace that one at all. Lots of process, lots of figuring it out, but that strategic layer is the most critical in order to get the ball rolling. Figure out what you really need to focus on versus what you can let slide or worry about after Armageddon.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
yeah, it completely makes sense. It certainly resonates with me. So you've mentioned you already had this, what I consider a superpower, which is to sit down and read dense material or just to focus yourself, at least in the year 2025, right? With the whole attention economy and that whole thing, right? But also you mentioned, this decision tree of prioritization. This is something that I'm kind of working on currently personally, right? Is because I'm naturally pretty good at planning things on paper and I could list out everything, right? But it's the actual prioritization of what is actually going to move the needle today versus what might feel
Mm-hmm.
good, right? There's those couple like low hanging fruits you can do while you're sipping your morning coffee, but are they really going to get you to where you need to go, right? Kind of 80/20 type axiom
Right.
there. So I that definitely resonates with me, and it's something that I'm working on. And I'll tell you, whenever I go on vacation next, that's probably when I'll end up cleaning my inbox. I hope not. I hope not. But because I keep pushing that off,
Well,
I'm like, yeah, that's not, unsubscribing from everything. Hopefully, I can figure out an AI tool to do that for me.
let's break down the email concept, because that's actually a great example on how to do prioritization using a Pascal's wager sort of planning. Now, with Pascal's wager, he actually came up with the idea in order to kind of mathematically compel people to go to church. But instead of doing that, let's think about it from a Eisenhower approach, which does the same thing, only instead of asking concepts about is there a God and should you be a believer, Eisenhower actually was a little bit more practical about um, do you have a clear idea of what the task is, and then is it present, is the uh, issue that you need to address going to affect you immediately, or if it's further down the way, maybe even not have a date. So for your emails, you could actually start to lay this out in a matrix, right? You'll have four quadrants. You have priority versus or importance versus non-importance. It's part of a critical project. It's part of an individual sale. There's somebody waiting on you to take an action versus not that critical of a response because it's just a newsletter or it's a alert from your CRM or some other web service or the like. And then the presentness, is that person waiting on a response today or say some other time in the future? You have a date involved. What you want to do is you want to try to first make sure that those questions are bivalent. They are yes, no. You don't want anything stuck in the middle because then everything gets thrown in the middle. And what do you got? You've got one quadrant with all your stuff and an
Hmm.
inbox of 8,000 items. You have it,
Yep.
everything's kind of. And that goes back to that concept of everything's a priority. If nothing's important, then everything's important. That sort of
Oh
thing.
yeah.
So define that problem first. Is that criticality, yes or no? If it has to happen or it impacts a what is defined as a critical system, then yes or no. And then on the other side, it's a timeliness. Is that activity going to happen, say, in the next day or the next week versus out beyond? And so you can then arrange your tasks into a quadrant. The most important things are going to be the ones that involve a critical response that has to happen that day. That's your yes, yes. The second quadrant that you can figure out pretty easy is your no, no. It's not critical and doesn't really have a time associated with it. All of that gets sent to the side. What you then left with is the stuff that could be critical but not necessarily timely, and then the other side is the stuff that's timely that's not necessarily critical. And how do you make the difference between those two? an escalation. Has, the person that sent you the email, uh-oh.
So Jeremy, let's move on here.
I think so. I started getting wrapped around the axle around prioritization, didn't I?
No, but that was very I appreciated that. My consultant brain was already visualizing the charts and how I would explain that moving forward. Having lived through 25 years of IT asset management evolution, from Y2K to cloud computing to now, AI, which is it's everywhere, at least in the media. What's been the most dramatic shift in how enterprises approach their technology budgets?
Ooh, that's a good one. So the thing that I've noticed, the biggest change, is the presumption that if it's in the cloud, it's not a problem. And here's what I mean by that. The early days of asset management, when you were dealing with the mainframe computing, all of the asset management around those dumb terminals, around the logins, around the cycle counts, was all done on-prem on the mainframe. As the microcomputer came into vogue, that computing power became distributed away from the central processing to decentralized processing, one PC on every desk. After Y2K and the internet starts to solidify its backbone and data streams, that computing power then shifts to the cloud and data centers away from the organization. And now with AI, you've got this extra hungry calculations that almost couldn't have happened if you were still dealing with individual centralized processing power. So two things then. So you see this extraction of the computing power away from the organization, which adds a challenging layer to asset management, because if you can't put your fingers on the hardware, how do you know what software is running on it? And how do you make sure that you're not over or underspending on both the hardware, the software, and the end user piece, right? But at the same time, what we're now seeing is a bit of a swing back into centralization. The replatforming and repatriatization of corporate data into centralized storage servers. The on-prem storage is becoming more in vogue. And it makes sense because you see we're realizing some of the security issues with data, especially if you're leveraging a LLM tool that might not have the appropriate fences to prevent cross-pollination from your instance of that LLM and somebody else's instance of the LLM. Lord help you if it happens to be your competitor. So that's probably the biggest challenge that we've seen. But if I can add an aside, it does make me smile, because as the LLMs are maturing and monetizing, you're seeing a licensing concept around tokens and cycle counts. You get so many questions, you get so many queries. It's usually by so many people. If you're paying more money, you can up that priority in the chain as it's being received, or otherwise you might get demoted if somebody else comes along with a higher priority than you. That's how the mainframes were originally licensed by IBM. You would have to run a cycle count on the programs, how many people accessed it, how many people ran the program, and you would have to take that back to IBM, and IBM would take it back to whatever calculations they had and tell you how much money you owe.
So that
Really,
would
it's
be
the same thing.
So that's actually interesting because, uh, going back to the corporate management consulting world, both of the previous firms that I had worked at, they said you can't use LLMs, and everybody was a little bummed out at first. And I think there was still a little under the radar usage. until maybe a few months, maybe a bit longer than anyone had hoped for. They came out with their, proprietary, hey, this is our closed environment LLM. Now, it was running last year's LLM models, but that's besides the point. And I think that's going to be big, point for a lot of companies, especially those who handle sensitive data.
Yeah.
I've seen case studies of law firms, right?
Hmm.
uh, Definitely implementing their own from scratch LLMs now with the use of things like N8N and other, AI-based workflow tools where you might not need a whole enterprise level team to build that out,
Right.
which I find really interesting.
That capability of once you really only have to train an LLM once, and then it's just a matter of making copies. And so from a security perspective, to be able to just pull that copy out of the public environment and put it into an air-gapped private environment, that might help make it more secure than any.
I think we're certainly going to see a lot more custom LLMs, or at least copy
Mm-hmm.
pasted with a different paint job. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I've started to see, I think even Arnold Schwarzenegger and a bunch of other celebrities, people who have a very big digital footprint and a lot of media, are starting to put out their own AI LLMs to say, in that example, hey Arnold, this is my workout routine, Arnold AI. How should I, where can I improve it or whatever. And your second point around the business model is interesting because just a few years ago, at least in SaaS, it was starting to be considered an emerging business model, pay as you go.
Right.
But it's funny because in other industries, that's one of the oldest business models. It's like a utilities, right? How much water
Right.
did you use? How much electricity or gas are you using? That's how much you're going to pay for. Uh,
Yeah.
um,
So, from a software licensing perspective, the impetus of moving to a subscription based or a pay as you go is partly to smooth out the highs and lows that you see in the more traditional pay once and own forever model, the permanent licensing, the perpetual, that's the word I was looking for, the
perpetual
perpetual
license.
licensing, because the software company would see a spike in revenue when the new edition or new version would be released and then trickle down until something would happen and then the new version would release and then you could sell it all over again or sell an upgrade to the from the old version for like a half price. But at the same time, you were still incurring those costs of maintenance and updates and security patches in between. Well, if it's pay as you go, then it's that monthly subscription that you can count on to come in every 30 days. And that helps even out the revenue flow to handle the patches and the support and the such. And if you're running a large data farm or data center, again, your costs are consistent. So why not try to make your revenue consistent?
No, I was just going to say the predictability of it makes almost everyone's life a little bit easier.
Well, so in when subscriptions first started becoming popular, I had managers look at me and say, software asset management will never be needed anymore because whatever we're using is all that we get charged for. So why do you have to worry about it? The risk from the consumer is not underspending, but overspending. And what I mean by that is with on prem software, you could copy it and give a copy to your buddy down the hall. They wouldn't pay for the license, so the software publisher wouldn't know about it, but yet they're missing out on revenue. In the intervening years of those big license version releases, software companies would then go in and make an audit of their clients, basically accusing them of using more software to do their work than what they paid for. And the penalties could be pretty steep. If you were found in arrears, you would lose your volume discount, you would lose all of your all of your benefits. You might even be barred from an upgrade. We've seen that happen. But with the subscription software, you need to be careful about over consumption, that you have users that are actively using that software, but then you're going to have a population of users that aren't or infrequently using it, but yet still need to pay for the full 30 days that a regular or a heavy user are going to use the software. And that shelfware can become rather expensive for the client, but the service provider loves it. Let me give you a kind of a separate example, right? To help clarify. The old joke about on-prem software was drug dealing rules, okay? The first hit's free. You get the company hooked on the system, and then you can charge them whatever you want, because what are they going to do? Walk away? Use another competitor? Nah, it costs too much to rip it all out and put it all back together. With subscriptions, it's gym membership rules. You ever go to the gym? Especially in January, this is my year. I'm going to get in shape. Yada, da, da, da. Everybody's there. And by March, there's only 3 or 4 people using all the equipment.
Yeah.
And you look at the gym, right? And there's all that new shiny equipment just sitting there waiting for anybody to use. Nobody's using it. Why? Can't bring themselves to cancel the subscription. There's penalties involved to keep you there for at least a year. All of that equipment is paid for not by the people using it, but by the people that aren't using it.
They
So
certainly make it hard to cancel.
right. So that's where software asset management still has a role. On the on-prem side, it is making sure that you've paid up and you're not risking unscheduled, unbudgeted audit penalties. On the other side, with the subscription models, you want to make sure that you are not overpaying for software that's just sitting there on the shelf or only being used one day out of a month or quarter, and be able to shift those licenses around as optimally as you can to reduce the total cost of ownership. Now, for the AI models where you've got those tiers of tokenization or prioritization, cycle count transactions, what you need to be able to do is pay attention to which users are the heavy users and which ones are not, and make sure that those token allocations are matching the demand properly, again, so that you are not out of balance and inflame your total cost of ownership beyond what you really want for that program.
That's interesting stuff. That's the stuff where I'm excited to have you on.
Yes. So in my book, I actually describe the problem still remains. And it's been this way again since the mainframe days. You have this 3-headed monster that asset managers have to pay attention to. You've got the software publishers, the software service providers, your subscription model folks out there. You have your corporate clients that are actually doing the buying and selling, the transactions between themselves and the software publishers. And then you have the end users. And those are the poor slobs like you and I and most of your listeners that are the button pushers. They're the George Jetsons of the world. Each one of those groups has a separate agenda that's distinct from the other two. The software publishers, they want to make money on their idea. They also have a fear that somebody's going to steal their IP or use their services improperly. So they have to constantly be vigilant and make sure that everybody's paying their bills and nobody's using more than their fair share. The corporate clients, Well, they're a little bit different. What do they want to do? They want to make money, but it's in their industry, and the same economic rules apply. You can't spend more to make your widgets that you then sell out in the rest of the economy. So you've got to be really keen to keep your total cost of ownership of your software and services as low as possible so you can still make your margin. Usually that's, the people that screen first are not the corporate customers, but the corporate shareholders, right? You miss a dividend and your CEO is going to be out of the job in a fat hurry. But what about the end users? Those end users just want to do their jobs. They want to be left alone to do their thing. And the funny thing about end users is that if given the chance, they will follow the rules. But if you make the rules too complicated that they can't do their job, they are very clever and will find ways around it and undermine the corporate company that's paying their salary, right? So you get this weird balance between the software publishers that ought to be working directly with the corporate client, but are also very keen to advertise their services and software to the end user community, knowing that it can be both a back end sell to the corporate clients where they can charge a lot more money, but also cause some problems in the background so that the corporate clients are more willing to deal with the software publishers, right? So you get this weird dynamic between these three, and that's where asset management is kind of sitting in the middle, trying to figure out how do we keep everybody happy and not get sued.
Well, Jeremy, I think that was an excellent answer to my next question, which is, how, based on previous technology disruptions, right? What can those historical lessons guide organizations as they budget for AI transformation? And it seems like those kind of universal economic principles and human psychology, or organizational psychology, I might say, are at play, right? Human nature doesn't change.
No.
Um,
Yeah.
and so, Jeremy, when we look ahead, I think even 5 years might be too much to accurately say anything, but let's call it, 24 months to 3 years, 2 to 3 years. So how
Hmm.
should IT leaders be structuring their asset management budgets to remain agile as this AI technology, continues to evolve rapidly?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a really good question. What we're seeing is a bit of a focus shift. And from the asset management perspective, it's becoming less about the assets themselves and the data about those assets, right? And what do I mean is knowing who is using what, when, to accomplish something becomes much more useful than just the actual quanta that says, well, we've got so many laptops here, we got so many desktops here, and we've got these users doing this stuff on this project. And let me give you an example, right? So the asset management group follows what they call an asset lifecycle. Everybody else knows, I'm going to presume they know what an asset life cycle is. It's kind of the basic steps that everything goes through when you buy something, you make it ready for use, you put it out in the environment, you bring it back and you say, can we use it again? Then fine, you throw it back into the to use pile in the inventory. And then once you're done with it, you throw it away, right? Bump, 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 bump. Everything goes through there. Too often they're focused on, well, how many things are actually deployed? How many things do we have in the inventory? Where the real question needs to be, what are the devices telling us that make us know that that device has actually been deployed versus it's still on the truck or it's sitting on my desk because it needs a memory upgrade and then we can use it again, right? There are clues in the data flow that will tell you what an asset is in any point in that asset lifecycle. And once you know that data, you can apply the automation to be able to say, hey, we don't need to wait around for a manager to say, hey, I've got a new employee onboarding, and oh, by the way, they start yesterday, and I need, a big laptop that's capable of modeling protein folding. Go ahead, go get it. The HR system actually knows when that employee is supposed to start anyway. So why doesn't the HR system, once it has all the approvals from HR and the manager and the like, take their data and fill out the deployment record to get that laptop that's capable of modeling protein folding, get it into the hands of the end user, figure out where that end user is actually sitting, and take care of that all at once. Now, from an asset management perspective, that cuts out a heck of a lot of steps. From a AI perspective, that's an agentic AI. But the problem is, if asset management doesn't have any clear definitions around the data that's necessary to drive that asset lifecycle, the agentic AI is just going to spin its wheels. That, long story short, that's where I think the big shift is happening, is that instead of trusting AI to just figure it out on its own in some sort of omniscient thing, there's going to become more of a reliance upon data integrity, data validation, and data modeling and normalization to ensure that the agentic AI and AI driven processes have the highest chance of success.
That makes total sense, because that's the foundation for which they're built on. It's what we
Right.
say in consulting, right? Garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But too often we're handed an AI tool that is treated as a magic bullet. It'll just figure it out because, I modeled it on the neurons of my dog. That's great, but my dog still chews on the furniture. And I really don't want an AI that chews on the furniture. I want the AI to be able to tell me, do we need to order more laptops, knowing that we have a merger and acquisition deal that's coming in, or what the resale value is on this particular department if we do the refresh in 3 weeks or 3 months. That's what I need. That's the data I need, not whether or not the dog's brain is being used to figure this stuff out. We should be doing that. So you're starting to see a shift in how humans are handling the data, not necessarily the technology anymore. And I think that's the next big thing.
Well, Jeremy, I think this has been a great conversation. I think your veteran experience in IT asset management is going to be especially valuable insight and guidance for our listeners, and as the world continues to change, we're going to need expert opinions on how to how to guide us forward. So, Jeremy, for those wanting to either learn more about the ITAM method um, or Burger Consulting, can you please tell listeners, where to find you?
Our website is the ITAM Coaches .com. That's ITAM Coaches plural.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Very active there with our newsletters and events. I would also point you, if you're curious about asset management, to check out my book. The title's Rethinking Information Technology Asset Management. It's my publisher's title. I actually had something different in there, but most libraries have a copy. You'll find it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or wherever you get your trade manuals. But just be warned, we have a second edition that is coming out. I think I'm allowed to talk about it. Otherwise, oops. Uh, but the second edition should be ready for release here in the fall.
Awesome. Just for our listeners, who are the types of clients you typically work with Is there any kind of specialization or size or anything like that?
Our ideal client are organizations of about 1,000 employees or greater. And the reason is that those are, they qualify for the volume license agreements from Microsoft, Adobe, and Oracle and the like. And let's face it, they're probably on a growth trajectory, and IT is overstressed, underfunded, understaffed, and really underappreciated. That's where we can come in and help them out. But we are also getting ready to experiment with one-on-one coaching and learning cohorts. So if you are one of these poor schmoes, underappreciated, underfunded in a large work environment, and you want to learn how to do ITAM better, reach out to me on LinkedIn, fill out our form on the website, and we can schedule a one-on-one coaching session with you to teach you this pragmatic ITAM method that we can help get you on your feet in as little as a couple of weeks.
Awesome. Once again, Jeremy, thank you for joining us on Amplify AI Partners. To our viewers, thank you, and keep amplifying the potential of your AI. And that's all for today. Thanks.
Humza, it's been a pleasure. Good luck to you.